Senator Hughes, you and I have been talking extensively about this bill and some of the concerns that some of us have with it. What is the overall legislative intent of this bill, of Senate Bill 1978?
Thank you, sir.
That includes the language of the floor amendment that you're going to offer.
Thank you, Senator. The intent of the bill is to make it clear that the government cannot discriminate against you or me or anyone else based on our affiliation with a religious group, including giving money to a religious group. That's very, very, I believe, succinctly stated what the bill as amended will do.
Well, the language in the bill, in the definition section, 2400.001, describes the adverse actions that the government would take that you contend could result in discrimination.
Yes, sir.
By the government. And it's very broad language in different contexts: to withhold, reduce, exclude, terminate, or otherwise deny any grant, contract, subcontract, cooperation agreement, loan, scholarship, license, registration, accreditation, employment, or other similar status to a person, to withhold under subsection B there, reduce, exclude, terminate, or otherwise deny any benefit provided under a benefit program. And then it goes on to describe some tax areas as well where the government might take adverse action. And so I noticed that governmental entities, in the definition of governmental entity of subsection 3, section 3, subsection D, it includes the judiciary, the Texas Supreme Court, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, a state judicial agency, the State Bar of Texas, or a court in this state. And the question I have for you is, given this broad language and given that it says adverse action means any action taken by a governmental entity, if there's a court decision by the Supreme Court or the Court of Criminal Appeals or any court, as the definition describes, that adversely affects, denies, terminates some benefit or contract by one of these religious organizations or businesses rather, are you saying that even they would be violating this particular statute?
No, thank you, Senator. Let me be clear. The bill does not protect the religious organizations themselves. The bill protects those individuals and organizations that might give to or affiliate with the religious organization. So I hope I said that right. Yeah. The bill is to protect you and me who choose to affiliate with the religious organization. It's not about protecting the organizations themselves, if that helps.
Why are courts included in the definition of governmental entity that might engage in some adverse action?
Well, Senator, the courts are one way that many Texans, many citizens intersect with the government. The courts are, in many ways, as disputes are decided, where the government exercises its power. And so we sure wouldn't want the court discriminating against someone based on their race, the religion, creed, the litany of I know you know these things well. You've litigated this area. I'm not instructing you, but the courts, certainly we want to make sure that the courts of all places are not exercising discrimination.
Well, I don't know. That's a troubling section for me regarding the governmental entities covered by this bill. But let's move on, because I have some other questions as well. I was listening to your discussion with Senator Menendez, and you seem to be suggesting that because this bill got ample notice and hearing over in the House side, and people got ample opportunity to testify, that somehow that obviates the need for us on the Senate side to have gotten notice and an ample opportunity for people to testify on the Senate bill. Is that your position?
Well, Senator, to be clear, the House and Senate bills as filed were identical. They were identical companions, and I think the records will verify that, identical companions. And so the Senate bill was waiting for the House bill to come over. So the action was over on the House bill. And then because of a procedural matter, the House bill wasn't able to move, then the Senate bill began to move. As you know, respectfully, it's not uncommon at all for almost every day we're on the floor, every time we bring up a bill, we make a motion to suspend the rules. It's not uncommon at all for us to move the process forward, especially later in the session when the clock is ticking. It's not uncommon at all for us to make motions to move the process along.
Yes, I understand that. And we do routinely here suspend the rules, as a matter of fact, not just in the latter part of the session, especially in the latter part of the session.
Yes.
But we don't go around generally, as far as I'm aware, suspending the rules pertaining to the committee hearing process.
Well, Senator,
and it seems it's kind of disturbing to me that, as a matter of process, we would be taking the position, even with identical bills, because we have both Senate and House bills that are identical, that even with those bills, that because there was ample opportunity for a hearing and testimony in one body, the other one doesn't really can dispense with that.
Well, Senator, I think we could each think of bills that we've carried and bills that have passed this session, and when there's a House bill and a Senate companion, when one of the bills has moved and has been thoroughly vetted, the other bill is not normally given the same treatment. I don't think that's uncommon.
Well, there's an issue with that, it seems to me. Let me ask you this. Section 2400.002 provides that a governmental entity cannot take any adverse action against a person, quote, based wholly or partly on the person's membership in, affiliation with, or contribution, donation, or other support provided to a religious organization. Can you tell me what would qualify as a religious organization?
Yes, Senator, and to make sure we're clear to respond to your last question, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think I can say every day we're on the floor in session, we suspend posting rules. I mean, every day, if that's the concern. But to answer your question, the amendment, the amendment I'll be offering incorporates the definition from Section 110.011 of the Civil Practice and Remedies Code. The heading of that section is civil rights. Except as provided in subsection B, this chapter doesn't establish a limited defense under federal state civil rights law. And then it says it's fully applicable to claims involving employment, education, goes through all the claims. And then it says, for the purposes of this subsection, an organization is a religious organization if the organization's primary purpose and function are religious. It is a religious school organized primarily for religious and educational purposes, or it's a religious charity organized primarily for religious and charitable purposes. And I think you'll find this important, it does not engage in activities that would disqualify it from tax-exempt status under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. So again, we lifted that from a section that says civil rights, because that's what this has been used for. There's been a concern, right, how perhaps religion, it has been used in the past as an excuse for discrimination. And so we use the definition that's in Texas law pertaining to civil rights, just so we're clear what a religious organization is. Now, that's the amendment I'll be offering, should we suspend the rules and move forward with the bill.
Do you not agree that it's been used in the past to discriminate, as you just said, that it is still used in the present
maybe
by
be
some
clear.
Religious organizations?
No, Senator, I'm saying this definition was put in place to prevent folks using religious organizations to discriminate. That's what this definition is for. So that's why we want to use this.
Okay.
I hope I answered your question right.
Well, let me move on. You know that religious organizations that believe in the persecution or targeting of people for various reasons still exist. I think you and I were talking about that earlier. Something that, of course, is very troubling. So, for example, let me ask you this. If a business was found to be donating money to or affiliated with a religious organization that held beliefs relating to the persecution of persons who identify as LGBTQ, a city or county could not deny a contract to this business on this basis?
Senator,
is that correct?
A religious organization would have to meet this test in Texas law. So you can't just call yourself a religion. For these purposes, a religious organization would have to meet this statutory test to get any protection for this law to apply.
Well, I understand that.
And the group you described doesn't sound like it would.
Well, What if a business that was applying for a government contract or a loan or some government program was found to be displaying a sign at their business that stated their refusal to serve persons who identify as LGBTQ because of the business's affiliation with a religious organization?
Senator,
what about that?
Senator, if an organization is breaking the law, again, I think this is very clear. This is not a cloak for breaking the law. One cannot perform an illegal act and say, "Oh, this is my religion." Now, as you know, the cases are pretty clear on that, and that's why this definition is here. So we want to be very clear about that. That's not what this bill's about.
Would a governmental entity still be prohibited from denying a contract, resource, or other services if the business claimed that their belief was related to their affiliation with a religious organization?
If it was not a religious organization that qualified under this statute, then none of this would apply. Pardon me. That's why we wanted to make sure and put the definition in there so folks know what we're talking about. It's not just a bare claim. It's got to qualify with what the statute says is a religious organization for these purposes.
Well, yes, and I'm not questioning now the definition of religious organization. I'm saying, would a governmental entity be prohibited from denying a contract, let's say, if the business that was wanting to contract claimed that their belief was related to the affiliation with a religious organization, their belief against the LGBTQ community, for example.
Okay, so to be clear, this bill is about giving money or affiliating with a religious organization. And so, under the law, if we do this, the government, the state, city, county, any political subdivision, they could not deny you a contract based on your affiliation with, giving money to, a religious organization as that's defined here. So if you're talking about taking discriminatory action, that's a separate matter entirely. This bill, if the amendment goes on, will only apply to discrimination against folks based on affiliation with, contributing money to, a religious organization.
And not other organizations.
That's right. That's right, Senator.
What about organizations that have a religious purpose, a religious mission, a religious activity? For example, and here's what I'm getting at.
Okay.
Let's get to the Chick-fil-A's
yes, sir.
situation here. I have here this report from Vox, which is an online publication.
Yes, sir.
That points out that that Chick-fil-A Foundation donated more than $1.8 million to 3 groups with a history of anti-LGBT discrimination in 2017. And it goes on to indicate that the charitable arm of Chick-fil-A gave $1.6 million to the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, a religious organization that requires its employees to refrain from homosexual acts, $150,000 to the Salvation Army, that's been accused, and I want to stress that, of anti-LGBTQ discrimination and advocacy for years, and $6,000 to the Paul Anderson Youth Home, a Christian residential home that teaches young boys that same-sex marriage is a rage against Jesus Christ and his values. Now, these are examples, and it goes on. The founder of Chick-fil-A donated money to a number of anti-gay charities, since your bill refers to charities, like the Marriage and Family Foundation, the Georgia Family Council, and Exodus International, a group that promotes conversion therapy. So would these be examples that you're talking about that would cross the line?
Thank you, Senator. I want to make sure this is clear. Let me say, the founder of Chick-fil-A, who some folks had concerns about, he's been deceased for a while, so they had to go back pretty far to go about that. But let's talk about those contributions. There are 3 groups. Fellowship of Christian Athletes. It's interesting that this arose in San Antonio. David Robinson, you don't want to criticize him too much in San Antonio. Of course, the star from the Spurs, really the legend. He he said this about the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. He received an award from them named after Red McCombs. He said this: the FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, has played a huge role in my life. They do a lot of good charitable work. So yes, sir, to answer your question, if this bill were to become law, we do want to protect people who are making contributions to groups like the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. The Salvation Army, Senator, about $2 billion in contributions. Wow. People from every stripe and around the world give them money. Senator, I know you know this, but they were fighting human trafficking decades before we started talking about it here. I mean, I would gladly defend the work of Fellowship of Christian Athletes and the Salvation Army. I think Chick-fil-A also gave $6,000 to a home for troubled youth in rural Georgia. And so, yes, sir, you're right. That's really what this is about. We want to make sure that businesses and individuals are not being discriminated against because they choose to give money to religious organizations. So yes, sir, you're right. That is what it's about.
Well, the examples you gave are other types of charitable donations that
those are the three groups that you just asked me about. It was Fellowship of Christian Athletes, Salvation Army, and that home in Georgia. To answer your question, those are the three groups that you asked me about from the Vox article.
Okay.
If I heard you correctly.
I have a few more questions regarding non-discrimination ordinances.
Yes, sir.
And I'd like to ask you questions about that. And the possible negative effect that this bill might have on these local policies. Because some of the bills that we've already passed through here are not yet law, so they're still, in effect, local non-discrimination ordinances.
Yes, sir.
So do you believe that this bill would in any way nullify, hinder the implementation of a non-discrimination ordinance in this state?
No, sir, I do not believe why. And I'll tell you why. Because non-discrimination ordinances, they affect conduct, what a business does with an individual, business to business. This bill, and with the amendment, this bill is only about actions that the government takes against us. And so this is only about government action, and again, just based on your affiliation with, contribution to a religious organization. So the intent is not, it's the furthest thing from discrimination. This protects everyone's religious freedom and free speech.
If a business or organization feels that a non-discrimination ordinance enacted by a city or county government violates their ability to deny services because of their affiliation with a religious organization with certain beliefs, would this bill provide that business or organization injunctive or judicial relief?
Senator, I want to make sure I understand. I don't know of a non-discrimination ordinance that's based on affiliation with a religious organization or contribution to. If it did, that would be a problem. I'm not aware of any that do that, but please let me know.
You don't see this as another attack on local control that would prohibit cities from enacting local policies that provide protections for the members of the LGBTQ community?
Oh, Senator, now, members of every community are protected by this bill, but as far as local control goes, this bill would prevent the state. It would prevent us. It would prevent the county, the city, political subdivisions. This would prevent all levels of government from discriminating. Because I know you know this, but this is the First Amendment, and so it's the First Amendment for a reason. You know this. And so, yes, sir, this would prevent all levels of government from the state and its political subdivisions from discriminating. You're right about that.
And as I said earlier, including the courts.
I'm sorry.
Including the judiciary, as I mentioned earlier.
Yes, that's right. Thank you, sir.
Well, listen, you've been very patient, and I appreciate your graciousness as usual in responding to the questions. Thank you for answering them. I will be having an amendment that I will offer, and hopefully it will be acceptable to you and to the rest of the members. Thank you, Mr. President.